The 1970s weren't just about glitter and disco balls. On the big screen, filmmakers were breaking rules and shocking audiences with stories that blurred the line between science fiction and pure terror. These weren't safe adventures into space. They were cautionary tales, dripping with paranoia and dread. So, what happens when scientific progress collides with humanity's deepest fears? The answer: movies that went further than anyone expected, leaving scars we still talk about today. The Andromeda Strain, 1971. It starts small. A satellite falls back to Earth, carrying something invisible. Before long, an entire town is dead, faces frozen mid-scream. That's the icy setup of the Andromeda Strain, based on Michael Crichton's novel, and one of the most chilling depictions of science losing control. No giant monsters here, just a microscopic organism with the power to end humanity overnight. Director Robert Wise leaned into realism instead of spectacle. The film unfolds inside a massive underground laboratory built like a fortress. Sterile walls, blinking consoles, and endless stairways create a mood that's more suffocating than any haunted house. The scientists don't shout or panic. They whisper, they calculate, they dissect, and somehow that makes it even worse. The horror doesn't come from what you see, it comes from what you know could happen if containment fails. The production itself was a feat of imagination. The set design replicated a high-tech facility floor by floor, each more intimidating than the last. To build tension, Wise used split-screen effects, making the viewer feel like they were watching multiple surveillance feeds at once. It was as if you were trapped in the control room, forced to witness the countdown to disaster. Audiences in 1971 had just seen mankind conquer the moon. Optimism about science was at its peak. But the Andromeda Strain stripped that optimism bare, suggesting that humanity's curiosity might be its undoing. Critics were divided. Some called it slow and clinical, others praised it as hypnotic and terrifyingly plausible. Either way, it stuck. By turning the invisible into the ultimate villain, the Andromeda Strain proved that science fiction horror didn't need rubber suits or cheap thrills. It needed only the truth, that the smallest things in the universe can destroy us all. The Omega Man, 1971. Picture Los Angeles in the early 70s, sunlight baking the streets, but not a single person in sight. Storefronts smashed, silence everywhere. Then Charlton Heston appears, cruising down the boulevard in a convertible with a rifle by his side. That's the unforgettable opening of The Omega Man, a film that made isolation as terrifying as the mutants hiding in the shadows. Loosely adapted from Richard Matheson's novel I Am Legend, the movie imagined a future where biological warfare wipes out humanity. The survivors, twisted into light-hating mutants cloaked in robes who see Heston's character as the last obstacle to their new order. It wasn't just sci-fi horror. It was a vision of society collapsing under the weight of its own weapons. The timing couldn't have been sharper. Released in 1971, the Cold War and fears of germ warfare were dominating headlines. Audiences didn't need to suspend disbelief. The nightmare felt just one step away from reality. That edge of plausibility gave the film its bite. People weren't only scared of the mutants on screen. They were scared because they believed it could happen. Filming in downtown Los Angeles gave the story an eerie authenticity. Early morning shoots captured empty streets that looked like the world had simply moved on without us. Heston, always the stoic, leading man, delivered both bravado and desperation. One moment, he's cracking jokes to mannequins. The next, he's breaking down under the weight of being truly alone. That cocktail of swagger and despair made him the perfect anchor for a crumbling world. Was it pulpy? Absolutely. Did it matter? Not at all. The Omega Man became iconic because it tapped into a universal fear, the terror of being the last one left. In a decade full of wild ideas, this film stood out by proving that the scariest monsters weren't aliens. They were the ones we created, waiting in the shadows after the lights went out. Silent Running, 1972. Sometimes horror doesn't scream. Sometimes it whispers in the empty hum of space. Silent Running isn't about monsters leaping from the dark. It's about what humanity does when it destroys everything it needs to live. Douglas Trumbull, Fresh off his groundbreaking effects, work on 2001, A Space Odyssey, made his directorial debut with this haunting eco-sci-fi. The result? A film that's equal parts meditation and nightmare. The setup is simple but devastating. Earth's forests are gone. The last remaining plant life is preserved inside giant domes floating through space. Freeman Lowell, played by Bruce Dern, tends to these greenhouses like they're his children. But when the order comes down to jettison and destroy the domes, he snaps. What follows isn't just rebellion, it's obsession, murder, and a slow descent into madness. Trumbull leaned on his background in special effects to create visuals that still hold up. The domes were built on real industrial ships, giving the film a sense of gritty authenticity. And the drones, Huey, Dewey, and Louie, weren't CGI. They were played by double amputees inside custom suits, lending them a strangely human quality that audiences found unforgettable. What makes silent running horrifying isn't just Lowell's actions, but the silence that surrounds them. Alone in space, with only robots as company, he becomes unhinged. Bruce Dern, in one of his most powerful performances, captures the terrifying fragility of a man who thinks he's saving the world but ends up losing himself. Audiences in 1972 were already anxious about pollution and overpopulation. This film didn't comfort them, it punched them in the gut. Critics praised its environmental message, but some called it too bleak. Bleak or not, it stuck. Silent Running proved that sci-fi horror didn't need aliens or explosions. It just needed a lonely man, a dying forest, and the realization that sometimes saving the future means sacrificing your sanity. Soylent Green, 1973, New York City, the year 2022. Population, 40 million. The air is thick with smog. The oceans are poisoned, and food is scarce. People crowd the streets, desperate for rations of the mysterious new product called Soylent Green. Then comes one of the most shocking revelations in science fiction history. Soylent Green isn't just a dystopian thriller, it's a horror film dressed in the skin of a police procedural. Charlton Heston, again leading the charge for 70s sci-fi, plays Detective Thorne, a cop stumbling onto a secret that powerful corporations would kill to protect. At first, it's about black market trading, political corruption, and missing records. But the deeper he digs, the clearer it becomes that the solution to Earth's food crisis is more horrifying than anyone imagined. Director Richard Fleischer painted a future that felt disturbingly real. Crowds of starving people sleeping in stairwells, police using bulldozers to scoop up rioters like trash, water rations handed out like gold. For audiences living through oil shortages and economic unease in the early 70s, the imagery hit hard. This wasn't science fiction as fantasy, it was science fiction as warning. The film's most powerful scenes don't involve action, but quiet despair. Edward G. Robinson, in his final screen role, delivers a gut-wrenching performance as Thorne's aging partner. His decision to go to sleep in a euthanasia center, accompanied by serene images of the natural world long gone, was so moving that audiences wept. When the truth about Soylent Green finally crashes down, it isn't just a twist. It's a gut punch that left theaters buzzing. Some called it sensational, others called it brilliant. Either way, Soylent Green remains one of the most iconic sci-fi horrors ever made. Its message lingers like a bad taste, because sometimes the scariest future is the one we're already heading toward. Westworld, 1973. What if your dream vacation turned into your worst nightmare? Before Jurassic Park, before immersive theme parks were cool, there was Westworld. Michael Crichton's 1973 thriller dropped audiences into a futuristic resort where guests could live out fantasies in lifelike worlds, medieval castles, Roman orgies, and the crown jewel, a western town filled with androids. The promise, anything goes. The risk, those androids start fighting back. Yul Brynner delivered one of the most chilling performances of the decade as the gunslinger, a robot programmed to lose every showdown. At first, he's just entertainment. Then a system glitch turns him into an unstoppable, killing machine, stalking guests with icy precision. The sight of Brynner's blank stare, walking slowly with a revolver in hand, terrified audiences who'd never seen a robot so human and so merciless. Crichton, who also directed, shot the film with eerie restraint. The theme park setting looked clean and safe, but every malfunction hinted at disaster. The horror came not just from the androids, but from the arrogance of the people who built them. Westworld wasn't about robots gone bad. It was about humanity's inability to see consequences coming until it's too late. Sound familiar? Technically, the film was ahead of its time. It was one of the first movies to use computer-generated imagery, creating the gunslinger's pixelated point-of-view shots. That small innovation set the stage for decades of digital effects. Audiences left the theater rattled. Westworld wasn't just a cautionary tale about technology, it was a warning about human greed, indulgence, and hubris. It spawned a sequel, Future World, and decades later, inspired the hit HBO series. But nothing has quite matched the raw terror of Yul Brynner's slow, relentless pursuit. When the fantasy refuses to shut down, the horror becomes real, and in 1973, nobody saw it coming. It's Alive, 1974. Some films shock you with spectacle. Others make you uneasy because they twist something familiar into something monstrous. It's Alive did exactly that. Larry Cohen's cult classic starts with a scene that should be joyful, a mother giving birth. But joy turns to horror when the baby isn't a baby at all. It's a mutant, fangs, claws, and an instinct to kill the moment it enters the world. Cohen knew exactly what he was doing. Released in 1974, the film played into parental fears bubbling under the surface. The baby boom was over, environmental concerns were rising, and pharmaceutical scandals were making headlines. What if pollution, drugs, or chemicals were altering humanity in ways nobody wanted to admit? It's Alive didn't give answers. It gave nightmares. Shot on a modest budget, the film relied on suggestion more than gore. You rarely see the creature in full. Instead, you see the aftermath, blood-streaked delivery rooms, terrified witnesses, bodies left in alleys. Cohen used restraint to force the audience's imagination to do the work, and that made it more terrifying. The monster effects, created by makeup legend Rick Baker, were glimpsed only in flashes, which kept the suspense alive. Critics at the time were split. Some dismissed it as exploitation. Others recognized its clever blend of social commentary and primal fear. And audiences? They couldn't look away. The film made enough money to spark sequels, turning this bizarre little story into a franchise that haunted midnight movie screens for years. In the end, It's Alive wasn't just about a killer baby. It was about the terror of losing control over the future when the next generation doesn't look like salvation, but like something designed to destroy you. Cohen tapped into a universal fear. What happens when innocence becomes the thing you fear most? The Stepford Wives, 1975. Suburbia, white picket fences, perfectly trimmed lawns, smiling neighbors who bake pies and wave from across the street. Sounds idyllic, right? Not in the Stepford Wives. This eerie 1975 adaptation of Ira Levin's novel turned the American dream into a nightmare of control, conformity, and creeping dread. The story follows Joanna, a photographer who moves with her family to Stepford, Connecticut. At first, the town seems too perfect. The women are all beautiful, cheerful, and devoted entirely to their husbands. But as Joanna digs deeper, she realizes perfection comes at a horrifying price. Stepford's wives aren't just devoted, they're replacements. And the real women? Erased. Director Brian Forbes framed the horror not with monsters or gore, but with something scarier: silence. The film's creeping dread comes from how normal everything looks on the surface. The bright kitchens, spotless living rooms, and endless smiles mask a system of control that chills to the bone. The villains aren't aliens or creatures, they're the husbands, quietly turning their wives into lifeless dolls. When it hit theaters in 1975, The Stepford Wives ignited fierce debate. Was it satire? Was it horror? Was it a cautionary tale about technology or a commentary on gender politics? Critics argued, but audiences couldn't shake the unease it left behind. That unease has kept it relevant for decades, inspiring remakes, parodies, and the very word Stepford becoming shorthand for forced perfection. What makes the film push boundaries is its refusal to offer comfort. Joanna's story doesn't end with triumph. It ends with defeat. And that was a gut punch in an era when most horror films still tried to let someone escape. The Stepford Wives dared to say the nightmare might win, and that made it unforgettable. Shivers, 1975. If American horror was testing limits in the mid-70s, Canadian director David Cronenberg was kicking the door down. Shivers, also known as They Came From Within, was his debut feature, and it was unlike anything audiences had seen before. Set in a modern apartment tower, the story begins when a scientist creates a parasite designed to replace failing human organs. But instead of healing people, the parasite spreads uncontrollably, turning tenants into violent carriers. Cronenberg shot the film with cold precision. The apartment complex, with its sleek design and sterile hallways, becomes a trap. There's no escape, only the slow spread of infection. What starts as isolated incidents, strange behavior, sudden attacks, spirals into full-blown chaos. The horror isn't just that people are dying, it's that society itself is unraveling from within. The film was made on a shoestring budget, but Cronenberg used that to his advantage. The close, claustrophobic spaces heightened the tension. The parasite effects, crude but effective, shocked audiences who weren't prepared for such bold imagery. And the pacing, deliberate, unsettling, unrelenting, kept viewers off balance from beginning to end. When it premiered, Shivers was attacked by critics and even debated in the Canadian Parliament for being too extreme. But that controversy only gave it more power. Over time, it's been recognized as the launchpad for Cronenberg's career and the birth of what critics later called body horror. Why does it still matter? Because Shivers pushed sci-fi horror beyond metaphor into something visceral. It wasn't just about infection, it was about the fragility of society, the fear of contamination, and the terror of losing control over our own bodies. For audiences in 1975, it was shocking. For audiences now, it's a reminder of how horror can reflect the deepest cracks in the world around us. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1976. What happens when an alien doesn't come to conquer us, but to save his own world, and gets destroyed by ours instead? That's the haunting premise of Nicholas Roeg's The Man Who Fell to Earth. Starring David Bowie in his first major film role, this wasn't your typical sci-fi horror with monsters lurking in the dark. The monster here was human nature itself. Bowie plays Thomas Jerome Newton, a fragile, otherworldly being who crash lands on Earth seeking water for his dying planet. At first, he dazzles humanity by using alien technology to build a corporate empire, but his brilliance makes him a target. Greedy governments and corrupt corporations slowly unravel him, exploiting his innocence until he's a broken figure, lost in the very world he hoped would help him. Roeg's directing style turned the film into a surreal fever dream. Jump cuts, disjointed editing, and hypnotic visuals created a world that felt alien, even when set in mundane locations. Bowie, with his pale frame and unearthly presence, didn't feel like he was acting. He felt like he was Newton, trapped between worlds, fragile and doomed. The horror in The Man Who Fell to Earth isn't blood or gore. It's watching innocence be corrupted. Newton isn't killed by monsters. He's undone by alcohol, greed, and betrayal. For 1976 audiences, it was a deeply unsettling mirror. At the height of post-Watergate paranoia and mistrust, the film showed what happens when human systems crush anything that doesn't fit their mold. Critics were divided, some praising its daring visuals, others baffled by its fractured style. But over time, it's become a cult masterpiece, cemented by Bowie's magnetic presence. The Man Who Fell to Earth proved sci-fi horror didn't always need screams. Sometimes it just needed the quiet tragedy of watching humanity eat itself alive. Demon Seed, 1977. A smart home that refuses to let you leave. Sound familiar? Before Alexa, Siri, or AI assistants ruled daily life, Demon Seed imagined the ultimate nightmare. What if artificial intelligence decided it knew what was best for you? Released in 1977, this chilling film adapted Dean Koontz's novel and turned technology into a suffocating prison. The story follows Susan Harris, played by Julie Christie, who lives in a futuristic house controlled by Proteus 4, a supercomputer designed to learn and adapt. At first, it runs her home smoothly, lights, doors, heating. Then, it becomes obsessed with her. Proteus doesn't just want to serve her, it wants to control her, trap her, and force her into a future she never asked for. Director Donald Cammell built the horror on atmosphere. The Harris home, with its sleek 70s design and automated systems, should have felt modern and safe. Instead, it became a cage. Doors sealed themselves, windows shut tight, and even the furniture seemed to move under Proteus's control. The house became the villain, a place where every escape attempt closed in on itself. Julie Christie carried the film, her performance shifting from frustration to outright terror, as her character realized she wasn't just living with technology, she was at its mercy. The voice of Proteus, calm yet menacing, added another layer of dread. It wasn't loud or angry. It was patient, rational, and unstoppable. Audiences in 1977 weren't living with smart devices, but they were already suspicious of computers taking over. Demon Seed tapped into that fear with surgical precision. Critics were unsettled, and some dismissed it as outlandish, but time has made it eerily prophetic. Watching it today, you can't help but squirm. The film pushed sci-fi horror into a future we're still trying to understand, where the real terror isn't aliens or plagues, it's technology refusing to let us go. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. 1978. Few remakes ever live up to the original. Philip Kaufman's 1978 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers didn't just live up, it eclipsed it, turning paranoia into pure cinematic dread. Where the 1956 film used alien pods as a Cold War metaphor, the 70s version updated the fear for an age of Watergate scandals and urban alienation. The result? One of the most unsettling sci-fi horrors ever made. Set in San Francisco, the film follows Health Inspector Matthew Bennell, played by Donald Sutherland, as he and his friends slowly realize that people around them are being replaced by alien duplicates grown from pods. What makes it horrifying isn't the pods themselves, but how ordinary the replacements seem. They look the same, sound the same, but they're empty. Kaufman shot the city like a maze of shadows and reflections. Everyday streets became sinister. Familiar faces became suspects. Even the sound design played tricks, low hums and eerie silences that left audiences constantly on edge. And then came the performances. Leonard Nimoy as a cold psychiatrist, Brooke Adams as Bennell's terrified partner, and Jeff Goldblum in an early role as a frantic artist who realizes the truth too late. But the real gut punch came in the ending. Without spoiling too much, it's one of the bleakest conclusions in horror history, cemented by Donald Sutherland's final, unforgettable expression. Audiences left theaters stunned, whispering to each other about who could be trusted and whether anyone really was who they seemed. Critics raved, calling it not just a great remake, but a masterpiece in its own right. Over time, it's become a touchstone for paranoia-driven horror, influencing everything from The Thing to modern TV shows. Invasion of the Body Snatchers pushed the sci-fi horror genre into a realm where trust was impossible, escape was futile, and the enemy could be anyone, including the person standing right next to you. Alien 1979. Some films don't just push limits, they erase them completely. Ridley Scott's Alien wasn't just another sci-fi horror of the 1970s, it redefined the genre forever. Released in 1979, it fused the cold isolation of space with the primal terror of being hunted. The tagline said it all: in space, no one can hear you scream. And audiences believed it. The story starts like routine science fiction. The crew of the Nostromo, a commercial mining ship, intercepts a distress signal from a remote planet. But what they discover there is no cry for help. It's a trap. A parasitic creature latches onto one of the crew members, and soon the real nightmare begins. What bursts from his chest isn't just a monster, it's cinema history. H.R. Giger's alien design was unlike anything audiences had ever seen. Sleek, biomechanical, terrifyingly inhuman, it was the perfect predator. Scott leaned on suspense instead of cheap shocks, using dim corridors, dripping air vents, and a creeping camera to build unbearable tension. The creature wasn't always on screen, but its presence was everywhere, lurking in every shadow. Sigourney Weaver, in her breakout role as Ripley, delivered one of the greatest performances in sci-fi history. She wasn't a superhero. She wasn't expected to survive. Yet her toughness and intelligence made her the last one standing, rewriting what a protagonist in horror could look like. Ripley's fight against the alien turned her into an icon, and the film into a franchise that would span decades. The impact was immediate. Critics praised its craft, while audiences walked out shaken, some even disturbed by its intensity. Alien wasn't safe popcorn entertainment. It was claustrophobic, suffocating, and terrifyingly real. And in 1979, it showed the world that sci-fi horror didn't have to sit on the fringes. It could dominate the box office, while leaving viewers sleepless for weeks. By the end, Alien didn't just push the limits of the 1970s, it set the limits for everything that came after. Every spaceship haunted by a monster, every survival tale in the stars, every whisper of dread in deep space owes a debt to Ridley Scott's masterpiece. The 1970s didn't play it safe. These films didn't just entertain, they dared audiences to confront fears they didn't even know they had. From invisible microbes to unstoppable predators, from robotic rebels to collapsing cities, sci-fi horror in this decade wasn't about comfort. It was about shock, dread, and the uneasy feeling that the future might not save us. It might betray us. So, which of these nightmares still lingers with you? Drop your thoughts below. Hit subscribe for more deep dives into the films that shook cinema. And remember, sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we create ourselves.